Weddings are supposed to be the happiest time in a woman's life. At least, that's what everyone always told me. Growing up, I imagined myself in white lace, walking down the aisle with my father, smiling at the man I loved as our friends and family celebrated. I never thought that the planning of that day, the day that was supposed to symbolize joy and commitment, would also become the source of one of the deepest betrayals of my life. I was 20 years old when I got engaged. Young, yes, but I wasn't naive. I believed in love, in loyalty, in the unbreakable bonds of friendship. And when I asked five of the most important women in my life, my sister, my cousin, and three lifelong friends, to stand beside me as my bridesmaids, I believed we were cementing a bond that would last forever. What I didn't know then was how quickly those bonds could break. This isn't just the story of a wedding, it's the story of friendship, betrayal, resilience, and the cruel irony of karma. Because sometimes life has a way of writing its own ending, an ending you never expect, but one that feels inevitable when it arrives. When he asked me to marry him, it wasn't a surprise in the traditional sense. We had been together long enough that the whispers of, "When will he propose?" had already begun from our friends and families. But that didn't make it any less magical. We were standing under the old oak tree at the edge of his parents' property, the summer air warm and heavy, the fireflies dancing in the twilight. He slipped the ring onto my finger, his hand trembling ever so slightly, and I felt tears rush to my eyes before I could even say yes. "Are you crying already?" he teased, his voice breaking from relief. "Of course I am," I laughed. "I've been waiting for this moment since I was 16. We kissed, and the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us. The next day, we called our families. My mother cried. His parents invited us over for dinner, and I gathered the courage to ask the women I wanted beside me on my wedding day to be my bridesmaids. My sister said yes immediately, already making jokes about ugly bridesmaid dresses and threatening to trip me on my way down the aisle. My cousin squealed so loudly over the phone that I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. And then there were my three friends, each from different chapters of my life, but each woven into my story. One of them was her. Let's call her Stephanie. Stephanie and I had been friends since high school. We bonded over late-night drives, over shared secrets, over the belief that we would always be in each other's corner. She was bold, outspoken, sometimes reckless, but I loved her for it. She said yes without hesitation, and I felt certain that having her by my side would make my wedding complete. I couldn't have been more wrong. Wedding planning is supposed to be stressful, and it was, but in the best way. We booked the church, reserved the reception hall, and sent out save the dates a full year in advance. Every Sunday afternoon became Wedding Central at my mom's house. Fabric swatches covered the kitchen table, invitations sat in neat stacks, and lists upon lists were taped to the refrigerator. My bridesmaids gathered with me often, sipping coffee and talking through every detail. Stephanie always had opinions. "That shade of pink is too pale," she said once, tossing the fabric swatch back onto the table. "You need something bolder." "It's my wedding, Steph," I reminded her gently, though I smiled. She smirked. "I'm just saying. You don't want people to fall asleep looking at the decorations." Sometimes she made me laugh. Sometimes she made me roll my eyes. But she was there, and that mattered to me. We went to dress fittings in the spring. I remember watching my sister twirl in her bridesmaid gown, my cousin giggling as she tried to balance in heels, and Stephanie standing tall with her hands on her hips, inspecting herself in the mirror like a queen. "I look good," she announced, loud enough for everyone in the boutique to hear. "You do," I agreed, though part of me noticed the way she looked at herself more than at me. Still, I didn't question it. I was blinded by the excitement of planning my future. The summer before the wedding, Stephanie invited me and my fiancé to spend a day with her and her husband at the local man-made lake. "It'll be fun," she insisted. "We'll take the boat out, maybe ride the jet ski, have a picnic. You need a break from all this wedding stress." She wasn't wrong. Planning had consumed my life. I wanted one day to just relax, to feel like the carefree 20-year-old I was supposed to be. So we agreed. The day started beautifully. The sky was cloudless, the sun warm but not unbearable. We packed sandwiches, chips, and lemonade, piling into their boat with excitement. Stephanie was in her element. She rode the jet ski like she was born for it, her hair whipping in the wind, her laughter echoing across the lake. Her husband manned the boat, while my fiancé and I sat close together, enjoying the peace. But peace doesn't last. At lunch, Stephanie's husband asked her if she had tied the protective bumper between the boat and the jet ski. "It'll be fine," she waved him off, brushing a crumb from her lap. He frowned, but didn't push it. After we ate, we decided to anchor near the swimming area. My fiancé, who couldn't swim, stayed close to the boat while the rest of us splashed in the water. The depth finder began glitching, flashing numbers like 900 feet. We laughed it off, assuming it was broken. Then we saw it. The boat was taking on water. Panic set in fast. By the time we scrambled back on board, the boat was half submerged. Her husband rushed to get the trailer. Stephanie and I went with the ranger to fetch our other car, leaving my fiancé, who couldn't swim alone with the sinking boat. They handed him the smallest bucket I'd ever seen, maybe a gallon at most. "Bail it out," they told him. And so he sat there, in the scorching sun, scooping water pointlessly, while the boat continued to sink beneath him. For an hour. By the time we returned, he was drenched in sweat, his face red from the heat, his arms trembling from the effort. My heart broke at the sight of him. When the boat was finally pulled out, we insisted on buying them dinner. It felt like the least we could do after such a stressful day. But something lingered with me, the way Stephanie had dismissed her husband's concern, the way she had left my fiancé alone to struggle while she rode in comfort with me. I brushed it off, thinking it was just her being her usual bold, careless self. I had no idea that this day would become the beginning of the end of our friendship. As the weeks slipped by, I threw myself deeper into wedding preparations. The church rehearsal was scheduled, the flowers were ordered, and my dress was hanging in my closet, waiting for its moment. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But with Stephanie, something had shifted. She stopped returning my calls right away. When I messaged her in our group chat with the bridesmaids, her replies were short one word, sometimes just an emoji. She skipped one of our final fittings, texting me a casual excuse about being busy. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Everyone has their own lives after all. But then, one evening, just 3 weeks before the wedding, she showed up at my door. "I need to talk to you," she said, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Sure, come in," I said, trying to mask the sudden pit in my stomach. We sat in the living room. My fiancé was in the other room, and the air between us felt tense, like a rubber band stretched too far. "I can't be in your wedding," she said abruptly. I blinked. "What? Why? What happened?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You chose Halloween for your wedding. Do you know what that means? That's the biggest party night of the year. I've already spent $300 on costumes for me and my husband, and I'm not giving that up." I stared at her, stunned into silence. A year ago, when we set the date, she had celebrated with me. She had agreed to it without hesitation. And now, 3 weeks before the most important day of my life. This was her excuse. Stephanie, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. You've known about this date for a year. You've been part of every step. And now you're backing out? For a costume party? She shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It's not my fault you picked the wrong day. The wrong day. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I wanted to scream, to tell her how selfish she was being, but instead, I just nodded numbly. Fine, I whispered. Do whatever you want. When she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest heaving. My fiancé came out, wrapping his arms around me, but even his comfort couldn't erase the bitterness. I told myself I'd move on, that it was her loss, not mine. But deep down, I knew something darker was brewing. The rehearsal was supposed to be a joyful evening, a chance for everyone to come together, to laugh, to practice for the big day. But instead, it was the night everything changed. We had just finished walking through the ceremony when my mom pulled me aside, her face pale. She held an envelope in her hand. This came in the mail, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's from Stephanie. My stomach dropped. I opened the letter, my hands shaking as I unfolded the paper. What I read made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a letter, it was an attack. In cruel, deliberate handwriting, Stephanie spelled out her vision of my future. You'll never amount to anything, she wrote. You'll never own a house. You'll never have a meaningful career. You'll be horrible parents. Your marriage will never last. You are losers in this game of life. And at the end, as if her venom wasn't enough, she included a bill and itemized list of damages to her boat from the lake incident. Damages she claimed were my fiancé's fault because he hadn't bailed water fast enough with the tiny bucket she had left him. I felt my face burn with rage and humiliation. My mom looked at me with eyes full of worry, waiting for me to say something, anything. But I couldn't. My throat closed, my vision blurred, and all I could do was clutch the letter until the paper crumpled in my hands. Later that night, I sat on my bed and read it again, punishing myself with every word. How could someone I trusted so deeply, someone I had chosen to stand by my side on the most important day of my life, turn on me so viciously? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The words circled my mind like vultures. By morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't let her ruin me. I would walk down that aisle with my head held high, with or without her. But a seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and cold. My dress hung in the window, glowing in the early sunlight. My bridesmaids, those who had stayed, buzzed around me with hairspray, makeup brushes, and laughter. But underneath it all, I carried the weight of Stephanie's words. I didn't tell anyone about the letter except my mom. I couldn't bring myself to ruin the day with more drama. So I smiled, I posed for pictures. I let my friends fuss over me. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the letter in my mind's eye. You'll never amount to anything. When the church doors opened and I stepped into the aisle, I forced myself to breathe. All eyes were on me, but my gaze was locked on my fiancé, waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Stephanie wasn't here. She had chosen not to stand with me. She had chosen cruelty over kindness, malice over friendship. But as I walked toward the man I loved, I realized she no longer had power over me. We exchanged vows. We kissed. We laughed and danced at the reception. And for one perfect day, I refused to let her poison touch me. But even as I smiled for the camera, even as we cut the cake and twirled on the dance floor, I felt the shadow of her betrayal linger. Because the truth is, some wounds don't bleed on the surface. They bury themselves deep inside you, waiting for years to resurface. And resurface, they eventually would. The first years of marriage were not without their challenges. We were young, still learning who we were as individuals, and even more so as partners. Money was tight, careers were just beginning, and the adjustment to adulthood was sometimes overwhelming. But despite the struggles, there was joy. We bought our first small house together, an old fixer-upper with creaky floors and walls that needed painting. I remember walking through those empty rooms with a bucket of paint in one hand and a roller in the other, laughing with my husband about how someday this would all feel like ours. And slowly, it did. Every room carried our sweat and effort. We built furniture, hung curtains, planted flowers in the yard. By the time we finished, that little house felt like a fortress ours and ours alone. It was in that house that we brought home our first child. I remember rocking him in the tiny nursery, staring at his perfect little face and thinking, Stephanie was wrong, because at that moment, I felt like the richest woman alive. Motherhood was hard, yes. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, the constant worry of whether I was doing enough. But it was also pure magic. Every smile, every milestone, every small victory lit me up from the inside. My husband worked hard, and so did I. I went back to school, eventually earning my master's degree, while juggling motherhood and work. I carved out a career for myself, little by little, brick by brick. There were days when exhaustion nearly broke me, but I pushed forward, fueled by something stronger than spite. Though I won't lie, proving Stephanie wrong was always in the back of my mind. The years blurred together: birthday parties, family vacations, school plays, Christmas mornings. Life wasn't perfect. No life ever is. But it was real. It was ours. And with every passing year, that venomous letter tucked away in a drawer seemed smaller, less powerful. 18 years is a long time to share with someone, long enough to build a family, create memories, and weather countless storms. But sometimes, even with love and effort, marriages fracture. The truth is, my husband and I grew in different directions. There wasn't one big betrayal, no dramatic affair or explosive fight, just a slow, quiet drifting. He became one person, and I became another. When we finally decided to divorce, it was painful, but it wasn't war. We grieved what we had lost, but we also respected each other too much to destroy what we had built. And so, we chose friendship. Even after the divorce, he came to holiday dinners. He showed up at birthdays, graduations, and family gatherings. Together, we co-parented our 3 children, determined to give them stability, love, and the knowledge that even though their parents weren't together, they were still a team. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I cried, nights I wondered if Stephanie's words had carried some cursed truth after all. But then I'd look at my children, their laughter, their resilience, their success, and I knew she had been wrong about everything that mattered. It was Christmas, 24 years after my wedding. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, the living room bursting with family chatter. My brothers had stepped outside for air, and when they came back in, one of them looked at me strangely. "You've got a friend outside," he said. Curious, I stepped out onto the porch and froze. There she was, Stephanie. The years had not been kind to her. Her face was gaunt, her teeth damaged, her frame skeletal. Her eyes, once bright with energy, now held a tired, sunken look. I couldn't help but notice the signs of addiction written all over her body. For a moment, time folded in on itself. I was 20 again, standing in my wedding dress, holding her letter in my hands, feeling my heart shatter. But then I blinked, and the present returned. She smiled weakly. "Hey," she said. "It's been a long time." "Yes," I replied carefully. "It has." We exchanged pleasantries, shallow, almost rehearsed. She asked about my life, and I told her the truth, that I had 3 wonderful children, a career I loved, and a home of my own, that my oldest had graduated college 2 years early and was already teaching, that my ex-husband and I had remained friends, celebrating holidays together as a family. And as I spoke, I saw her nod, her smile faltering ever so slightly. She didn't say much about her own life, but she didn't need to. Her appearance told the story for her. We parted politely, promising nothing. And as I closed the door behind me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not triumph, just peace. That night, after the house grew quiet, I sat by the fire and thought back to the girl I had been at 20. The one who cried over a letter filled with cruel predictions. Back then, Stephanie's words had felt like a curse, a shadow that would haunt me forever. But now, with decades behind me, I realized the truth. Her letter hadn't cursed me, it had fueled me. It had pushed me to build, to grow, to prove not to her, but to myself, that I was more than the small box she had tried to trap me in. And I had succeeded. I had lived a life full of love, growth, and meaning. I had raised children who made me proud every single day. I had carved out a place in the world for myself. Stephanie's life had taken a different path, one I wouldn't wish on anyone. I felt no joy in her pain, no satisfaction in her struggles. But I did feel grateful that I had chosen differently, that I had walked away from her darkness and into my own light. In the end, she had been wrong about me, and perhaps that was all the closure I ever needed.